Dr. Bailey, how you doing, sir?
I'm fine, sir. How about you?
I am fine. We got you on today. There's been so much conversation about the Confederate flag. First of all, let me say I'm from the North, so we had our own issues, so I don't really get into the argument about the flag. But tell me about that flag, why it came about, and give us the truth about it and what it represents.
Well, there's so much to say about the Confederate flag. Number one, the flag represents the Confederacy, the states that seceded from the Union with the election of Abraham Lincoln as the first Republican president. And the states southern states had vowed that if Lincoln were elected, since they believed that he stood for opposition, staunch opposition, if you will, to the expansion of slavery. So these states seceded, and that first Confederate flag was the flag of the Confederacy. But the flag that we are talking about is the current flag that came into being in 1904. And that's the flag that has everybody up in arms, if you will. That's the flag that's supposed to represent the lost cause, the fact that some people in the South disagree with the outcome of the war and are still hanging on to the fact that the South lost the war. And it seems like the country's in an uproar right now, trying to remove Confederate symbols, all sorts of images, because as far as many people are concerned, and I'm not saying everybody, and I'm going to get into some statistics in just a few minutes to actually delineate exactly who these people are who don't want these Confederate symbols removed and the ones who do want those symbols removed. But anyway, beginning in 1904, we got this flag that we see now that's supposed to represent white supremacy at its best and an endorsement of slavery.
Okay. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I heard you.
Now, let me get into a little history right quickly here. The Civil War ended in 1865. Lee surrenders to Grant in April of 1865. The Civil War ends in Alabama in May 1865. And the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, was the party that brought freedom and emancipation to African Americans and brought a new day in the South. In Alabama, we had to have a new constitution, and the first post-Civil War constitution we had in the state was the Constitution of 1865. But it seemed as if there was some resistance to accepting the 13th Amendment, first of all. So all of these southern states had to ratify the 13th Amendment. And you won't believe it, but Mississippi was the last state to ratify the 13th Amendment, and it seemed as if there was some kind of glitch that it just did so a couple of years ago. But the Reconstruction period brought us 3 Civil War amendments: the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment, 1865, 1868, 1870. The 1868 Constitution in Alabama was one of the most liberal constitutions of that day. It gave us universal public education for the women who are listening now. And this is something I've spoken on many times, but it doesn't seem to have grabbed anybody. Before 1868, if a female were to marry, her property became the property of her husband. With the Constitution of 1868, that was no longer true. That was the beginning of real women rights in the state of Alabama. But we had a faction in this state that disagreed with universal education. That is to say that anybody can get an education and the tax dollars would be used to support public education, that state board of education that we got. So in 1875, we made certain we got rid of the state board of education and we tried to turn the clock back. William v. Mississippi, that case in 1890 was the beginning of those constitutions that would ensure a return to the pre-Civil War days, the antebellum days. Alabama got its constitution in 1901 that disfranchised at least 95% of the black voters in this state. Now, the catch to that is that in 1904, we got this state flag. We got this new Confederate flag, if you will, this emblem, if you will. And that was the beginning to where we are today. Those Confederate veterans who were still alive and who still disagree with the outcome of the war, and everybody wanted to ensure that the black man knew his place and that white supremacy would remain supreme in this country. So that's where we are today, with all of those states enacting or ratifying new constitution that deprive African Americans of the right to vote, ensuring that they did not vote. And we did not have that overturned until the Civil Rights Act of August 1965 that President Lyndon Johnson signed, with Dr. King and some of the others standing around him as he affixed his signature to that civil rights bill, making it the Civil Rights Act. So what we're saying is with that Confederate flag, that is a symbol of white supremacy. And believe it or not, almost no one on that side of the table has paused to say that whatever prominence the South has, enslaved Africans were responsible for that. Those persons who worked for no wages whatsoever, who marched out of slavery with only the clothes on their backs and have not received a penny to this day for their labors. And all they want to do is to ensure that they can continue to flaunt those Confederate symbols, which are really a slap not only in the face of African American, but in the face of democracy. So that's where we are. And as we speak, I don't know how many people have listened to the news over the weekend, but the state of Mississippi has voted to remove that Confederate emblem from its state flag. And the bill is headed to the governor's desk right now for his signature.
And he he said he'd sign it too, so that was good.
He said that's right. He said it would sign it. And then in the state of New Jersey, where Princeton University is located, the authorities have decided that they would give us justice with the posture that President Woodrow Wilson had toward black people, et cetera, with his racist views. So the tide is turning regarding Confederate symbols, the Confederate flag, which is a part of that in this entire country and in this world.
Dr. Bailey, let me ask you a question. And I don't have this relationship with this flag as most people do, be it pro or be it con. But I understand that flag, you said, came about in 1904. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. I'm not going to give our education system in America that much credit to people who are graduating our high schools today and even the last 20 years, that they look at this thing as a symbol of white supremacy. Now, initially, upon its concept, I agree with you, but I don't believe that a lot of those people, they even know the history of the flag to even form an opinion like that. And are we making much to do about nothing in 2020?
Very good. I'm glad you framed that question as you did. Some research was done in 2019, surveying 34,000 people. And here's some of the conclusion of that research. Persons 44 and younger don't see that Confederate flag as representing Southern heritage as persons 65 and older do.
Okay.
Which means the person you're talking about graduating from high schools and college don't see that flag as a symbol of Southern heritage. That was the question in that report. How many of you see that Confederate flag as a symbol of racism or Southern heritage? And those persons 44 years of age and younger don't see it as a symbol of Southern heritage. And then the report focused on regions of the country. Persons in the Northeast see that flag as a symbol of racism, something like 49%. Persons on the Pacific Coast see that flag as a symbol of racism, something like 44%. And then for African Americans, something like 73% of African Americans who are college educated see that flag as a symbol of racism, and something like 61% see that flag as a symbol of racism. And then among whites, the chances of a white person seeing that flag as a symbol of Southern heritage is greatest among those who are without a high school education, those who lived in rural areas. The white population that is better educated is not as inclined to see that Confederate flag as a symbol of Southern heritage as it is the one who is not as well educated. All right, let me go a step further. That report shows that the greater the education a white person has, the lesser the chances of that person seeing that flag as a symbol of Southern heritage and as a symbol of racism. So that's why we need to ensure that our people get an education. But let me go a step further with you. How do we get there in the first place with 1904 even? Mm-hmm. In Alabama, a whole generation of us, and so we're talking about persons 65 and older, grew up hearing sordid stories. Are you still there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I heard some. Many persons grew up hearing stories, sordid stories about Reconstruction. And I'm so happy that I was able to write a book about Reconstruction. And Walter Linwood Fleming, Alabama born, was the architect with his book, Civil War and Reconstruction in Alabama, that many persons grew up hearing the stories of just how bad Reconstruction was in the South. And Fleming was a disciple of William Archibald Dunning from Columbia University. And he brought and actually helped to mature that philosophy of what went wrong with Reconstruction. And many people of the generations before me and maybe one generation after me have relied on, we're talking about black and white people, and accepted that thesis that there was nothing good that happened during Reconstruction. Coleman Young became the first black mayor of Detroit. When he was in high school, he had a scholarship, and I'm saying that since you said you're from the North. He wrote a paper on Reconstruction, and he said that he did not know about all of those things that African Americans and the Republican Party brought to the table during Reconstruction. He did not get that scholarship. And what I'm saying is that Confederate flag has distorted the image of American history to the side that shows black people as a problem, and that white people should always feel that they are right in defending their way of life. That's what that Confederate flag and that's what the Confederate stands for. the attempt of white people to defend their way of life, and that anyone who wants to encroach on their thinking, something is somehow wrong with that.
Dr. Bailey, one of the things I have put forth that some people have aggressively disagreed with me. People have a right to have their own heroes, good, bad, or indifferent. And if I'm a Southerner, not that much education, don't really think a lot about it, don't I have the right to make my hero of whom I choose?
Let me say this. One of the pillars upon which American democracy stands is the First Amendment. Except that we don't have a right to walk into a crowded theater and shout fire.
Right.
We can have as our heroes anyone we want. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. The problem is that if you want taxpayers to pay you to flaunt your heroes to the public using tax dollars, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with when you have military bases named for persons who fought against the United States. Anyone should feel free to do anything in their homes or in their private organization as they see fit. But at the same time, you cannot encroach on the liberties of other people. That's the problem. That is a full indication of the limits of the First Amendment. And what I'm saying is that when an African American looks at that flag, that African American doesn't see, I don't believe, the same thing that a white person sees. And here's what I'm saying. Nikki Haley, as governor in South Carolina, made the speech in defending that flag that has stood for a bunch of good things. And shortly after that, that man broke into that Manuel Temple AME church and killed those people. She took down that flag.
But now that goes into the face of what you were saying. First of all, if 45-year-olds and below don't
44.
see right, don't see the flag in that perspective, aren't we ripping off a scab of a sore that's been trying to heal for a long time? If we, the resurgence of the opposition against it now has brought all kind of idiots out in America, where it was dying a slow death, because obviously by these people that are 44 and below and younger are not, could care less about it. So aren't we kind of putting fuel on a fire that didn't exist for a while?
Well, in a way, there was a school of thought that even in 1860 that slavery was dying out, that mechanization would eventually overturn an agricultural-based economy. If you see where I'm going with that, there are some persons in the church who believe that eventually right would triumph over evil. Okay. And what I'm saying is, even for those young people who don't see that Confederate flag as a symbol of Southern heritage, the point that some of these people who are opposed to that flag are saying the flag should not be flown and supported with tax dollars. It should be taken to a private museum, something of that nature. And I think that's what all of these people are saying, that public dollars should not be used to support something that dehumanizes a segment of the population. Mm-hmm. And let me also say something else about that report, that survey. Hispanics and Asian Americans, most of them see that Confederate flag as a symbol of Southern heritage. So what I'm saying, and I know exactly where you're coming from, maybe if the whole issue would just die out if we just leave it alone. But at the same time, what some of the persons who are opposed to it are saying is that still you're using tax dollars to keep it there. And
Okay.
the point is, just because nobody calls you the N-word doesn't mean that person doesn't hate your guts.
But does it matter if he hates my gut?
And doesn't, right. See, what we're saying, two things, and I want to draw the line real sharply here. What you do in your private doings,
Mm-hmm.
you can account for that. But when it comes to public utterances, I can stand in my house and say, I'm going to do something bad to the president. But if I walk out of this house and say that in the mall, that's a totally different matter. And somebody hears me, that's a totally different matter. I can hate person in my heart, but if I act upon it, that's what makes it legally wrong and unjust. And the only thing we're saying for persons who have not gotten the message regarding the Confederate flag is that it symbolizes a day back in time when a segment of the American population was held in bondage, and that these people, a segment of the current population, want to hold on to those days. And that's the problem. They want to use tax dollars to hold on to those days.
Is it true, although historically I know it's true, blacks have been done wrong for a longer period of time under the United States flag? Why aren't we asking it to be done away with?
What, the United States government itself?
Yeah, the flag represents this country that for a long period of time, a hell of a lot longer than 4 years, blacks were misused under. Why aren't we getting rid of that?
Well, because we are a united nation. And that's what Jefferson was talking about, the ideals of democracy. We're not a perfect union. But the point is, when we celebrate the 4th of July,
mm-hmm.
later this week, and we reflect on Catherine Lee Bates as she left the Northeast and went and saw the snow-capped Rockies and wrote that wonderful song that all of us sing. This is a wonderful country.
True.
And we have our shortcomings just as families do. But we don't want one cousin to assume that that cousin can use tax dollars to say derogatory things about another cousin. We are one country, and we're going to remain one country as long as we believe that we are one country.
Right.
When you travel outside of this country, you'll find that there are still some people who look up to America. And I'm not talking about current politics.
Right.
But I'm talking about historically. There are still some people who look up to this country. And you'll find there are still some white people who don't hate black folks. There are a bunch of white folks who don't hate black folks.
Thank God for that.
And well, yeah. Well, thank God for God. And there are still some black people who are willing to speak out and let people know how uncomfortable we are when we have been humiliated historically, not just currently, but historically. When you look at your history books, how many African Americans were in those books when you and I and our parents were growing up in school? When you look at the newspapers, we could make front pages, we committed a crime. But that was it. And we still got many roads to go down to make this country what Jefferson knew that this country could become. It may take another 50 years. It may take another 100 years, but we must remain hopeful. And one way of ensuring the dreams of Thomas Jefferson and those framers of the Declaration of Independence, and I'm glad you had me on right before the 4th of July, because this becomes an opportune time to say these things. This is America. And we want people in this country to know, and we want people outside of this country to know, we stand as one. And we're going to let those persons who want that Confederate flag to stay there, we don't hate them, but we disagree with what you're trying to do to us. And that is to make us feel that we are still slaves, that we still can protest peacefully, and someone will come and put a chokehold on us because we're protesting peacefully. We are still saying that when we go to the courthouse, sometimes we don't get justice. When we go to the bank to get a loan to start a business, that we're going to be denied because of the color of our skin. We are still saying that many of our colleges and universities don't get funding just because they are predominantly Black colleges and universities. We are still saying that when you look across this country, especially in the South, the only time you find something named for Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, it has something to do with Black America, when those guys were presidents of the United States. This is what we are saying in 2020, that we want to make this country what this country was designed to be. And I know there are some people saying, well, Jefferson owned slaves and Washington owned slaves and all of that. But the point is, we want this country to achieve the ideals that those founding fathers knew this country could become one day.
Right.
And that's where we are.
Yeah, Dr. Bailey, let me ask you a question. You know, it sounds like America is a country that was built by imperfect people, and therefore we will never be perfect. But getting back to my first question, one of my questions, historically, Black folks have been done wrong under the great flag we have now than the Confederate flag. So logically, I can see it on the flagpole here. At what point are we going to come after that flag? Because we were done wronger then than we ever underneath the other flag. The symbol,
Sure.
the symbol, what you think of it it's an individual thing. I'm just afraid that we are stoking the fires of dissent in our nation right now. And one more thing that I'll let you answer. In 1958 or 57, even though the Confederate soldiers were made by law, I think it's called Public Law 810 during that time, as veterans. Now, there is some concern of whether or not they were given the same privileges and rights as other veterans, depending on which publication you read. But the monuments that have been brought up were put up by federal law. So we really don't have a legal right to remove these monuments unless the president just doesn't want to get involved in it. But these monuments came as a offset of making them veterans in 1957. So from that point on, the monuments were deemed relevant and legal. And now we want to take everything down because some guy who was a human being and had the faults like others, we want to destroy all the things that represent evil and bad. And hell, tell you the truth, if you look in the mirror, we all represent some of that at times. So what say you?
Okay. All right. Number one, I understand your point about the fact that African Americans have been in this country and they suffered injustices longer under the United States flag than they did under the Confederate flag.
Right.
That's what the United States Supreme Court is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Persons in this country who have grievances against the government can take it to the United States. And then beginning in the 1945, I believe it was, we got the United Nations, whereby a person who might have grievances against his government can take those grievances to an international tribunal. But let me say this regarding your point specifically. At the end of the Civil War, Confederate officers could ask the president, Andrew Johnson, for pardoning if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So there were avenues,
and he did
right after the Civil War. Yeah, right. There were avenues right after the Civil War to amend, to issue an olive branch, if you will. Even Benjamin Turner, who was the Alabama's first congressman, was not interested in punishing former Confederates. And even some black people have criticized Benjamin Turner because of that. But the point of the matter is that in 1958, first of all, there was not a single Confederate veteran alive then.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that anyone might have done regarding a Confederate veteran was just that, something that they could not benefit from because they were not alive.
Right. The last widow of Confederate died 1956, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And that was somebody that a Confederate soldier married who was very young.
Very young.
While there was a great difference in their age. Mm-hmm. But let me just tell you this: since you opened the door for that, let me mention James Young. James Young fought for the Confederacy out of Bullock County, and right after 1900. He got some people in the Union Springs area to write a letter to the pensions board here in Montgomery asking for an increase in pension.
Right.
He was denied his pension. And I'm using James Young. I mentioned this in my Carpetbagger book. I mentioned James Young because James Young was an African American. And the lady in the pension office said, "We're going to deny you an increase in your pension, because no black person served with the Confederacy." And this is one of the paradoxes of the Confederacy for those African Americans who attended those Confederate reunions in places like Clanton as late as 1935, that even the Confederacy doesn't want to address those kind of issues. But what I'm saying is that no one is trying to punish the Confederacy. If I'm discerning your tone here correctly, mm-hmm. No one is trying to punish the Confederacy. The only thing that the persons who want those statues to come down is saying they should not be on public property.
Okay.
That's the only point. And again, your point about African Americans serving as in slavery, enslavement longer under the United States flag. That's what the Supreme Court is all about. The case of Scott versus Sanford is a good example. 1857, Roger B. Taney was the Supreme Court justice out of Maryland. He was a slaveholder. And see, Roger B. Taney is the one who gave us what that Confederate flag in the South was leaning on when he said that a black man had no rights that a white man was bound to respect because he was a piece of property.
He did say that. And he said that we would never be citizens of this country. Right. And till this day, I have not heard anybody on the Supreme Court challenge that statement, yay or nay. So,
well, see, yeah, right. You didn't have to. Let me back up a minute.
Okay.
And to show you where we're going with that line of thinking. When we had the Emancipation Proclamation passed, signed by President Lincoln on 1 January 1863, mm-hmm. Frederick Douglass and some others said to him that, Mr. President, we need more than a proclamation. That's where the 13th Amendment comes from in December 1865, saying that involuntary servitude would no longer be permitted in this country. And then the 14th Amendment actually overturns what Roger B. Taney was saying by making us citizens. And then the 15th Amendment, 1870, giving us the right to vote. So Roger B. Taney's thinking was overturned with the 14th Amendment.
Mm-hmm. Tell me that you have written a few books. I know they too call Alabama home, and you've written a couple other books. Tell us about those.
Well, first of all, my first book was Neither Carpetbaggers Nor Scalawags, Black Office Holders During the Reconstruction of Alabama, 1867 to 1868. And that book is now in its 5th edition. And what I tried to do in that book was to set the tone for post-Civil War Alabama. And in doing so, I mentioned how Reconstruction gave us the state's first universal system of public education. All of a sudden, anyone in Alabama could receive a public education. And I gave a couple of speeches on that first legislature in the state of Alabama and what it actually brought to the table. And believe it or not, Alabama was moving along quite well with the kind of progress it was making in education. And I have charts in the book to show how much money the state was expending for public education, how the sick and infirm was taken care of with that home at right outside of Talladega, Alabama. Mm-hmm. Even at one point, how those people were brought to the legislature and paraded in front of the governor. And I made the point in one of my speeches that on that day, Alabama became a symbol of compassion instead of a symbol of the Civil War. But soon, when the Democrats came back to office, funding for the sick, the infirm was basically cut out. When they came to power after the Constitution of 1875, the State Board of Education was dismantled. In other words, when those Bourbon Democrats came back to power, they ensured that Alabama returned as much as possible to what it was like before 1861. So what we're saying, what I tried to say in that book is that during Reconstruction, we got the state's first black bank. I have a chart in there that's showing how much the deposits were, where they came from, who made the deposits, a listing of all your black office holders during Reconstruction on the state, county, and national level. And I have a listing of all of the teachers that came south to work in these schools, where they came from, what organizations sponsored them, how long they work here. And people have not taken into consideration the kind of opposition these teachers faced. I have the history of all of our black schools, the schools that became black colleges, using primary sources. Those are just some of the things, but most of all, that first chapter in that book deals with the end of the Civil War and African-American response to the end of the Civil War. What did African-Americans do? Some of them remained on plantations, and some of them went to the nearest city, but there was opposition everywhere. And let me just tell you this one story. Many slaveholders, former slaveholders, did their best to keep African-Americans on those plantations. And when I hear people talk about Juneteenth, a very good story, and I have reminded people what General Granger and some of the other Union soldiers had to do was to go to those plantations and actually stay on their horses until those former slaves actually walked away, because they knew if they just said that you are free, those former plantation owners were not going to accept that and let those people leave those plantations. So there are so many stories that we can tell. But the point of the matter is, bottom line, that Confederate flag is a way that a certain segment of our population wants to remind us of what this country, not just Alabama, but what this country was like before 1861.
One more question. Let me ask you. Ever since this issue came up about this flag, and it comes up every time there's a discussion of race in America, but we're not these weak-kneed people who get hyper and offended and scared because we see this flag, are we? I mean, we're a lot stronger than that. If we ignore it as individuals, it has no power over us. So why do we like to put ourselves in the victimhood because of some stupid, uneducated person likes to ride around in his truck on a flag? Or is your complaint or is your issue, okay, fine. If you're an individual, if you want to be seen stupid and uneducated, fine. But do not put it on top of state buildings, city buildings, and pay for it with the tax dollars of the Americans.
That's what we are. You ride the flag in your pickup truck all you want. Feel proud that your grandfather served the Confederacy, that he fought at Chickamauga or whatever the case might be. But as far as tax dollars are concerned, no. That's the bottom line, and that's where the greatest opposition comes from, on the persons who want that Confederate flag and Confederate emblems to forever flaunt it before the faces of people, but using tax dollars. Put it in your museum, and things like that. So in that way, we won't have the friction that we have now. But at the same time, I don't think that anyone should flaunt it. If a person doesn't want to accept Dr. King, fine. I don't think anybody who has a Dr. King program is trying to have that program at a place where the persons might not want that program to be held there. If you see what I'm saying.
I got you.
And the thing is, if you're going to have a Confederate symbol, don't put it at the state capitol. And then too, make certain you got your facts right about these people, and go from there. In other words, it's not about hatred. It's about not allowing a segment of the population to bully another segment of the population. That's what it all boils down to. That's what Gone with the Wind is all about. For those persons who want to still view Gone with the Wind, The Birth of a Nation, and some of those other movies, all those movies glorify the lost cause, what the South used to be. And that's what that company was talking about last week in terms of taking Aunt Jemima off of the cover of those pancake boxes and all of that. Some people, when they purchased that or when they walked in the grocery store, they might have been interested in pancakes, but they felt real good seeing that lady with that handkerchief on her head because of what it symbolized, if you see what I'm saying.
But you can't, Dr. Bailey, let me ask you, it's my understanding that picture on that box was put there as a sign of homage to her. We can't help when people think something that isn't so, can we?
Right. No, you can't. You're on solid ground. But see, here's the point. The company agreed to do that.
Right.
And what the company said is that the company believed that a certain segment of the American population was offended by having that there. So that was just noble on their part to do that. And we have to applaud that. So I don't think there was any loud protest of removing that symbol from that box, but we do applaud the company being sensitive enough to do that. And the point of the matter is, even years ago, when we got all of these symbols being erected here and erected there, Black people were in a powerless position to do anything about it. We're talking about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and similar organizations, and Black people didn't even have the right to vote in 1910 because we had lost it basically everywhere. And the point that you raised is a very good one. Just 1 minute, I want to put a pin in it.
Okay.
You get a rise in these Confederate symbols. Every time it seemed as if Black people are making progress. Now that tells you the whole story right there.
I can sort of see that, but it seems like to me, just like arguing about Aunt Jemima on the box, that ignorance and lack of education is responsible for some of these attitudes on both sides. But we don't seem to have to take responsibility for the misunderstandings that we have.
Okay, so here's the catch. If we factor in the issue as having guilty parties on both sides, that point is well taken. Here's the difference. That black person you're talking about is not a justice of the Supreme Court. That black person you're talking about is not a bank president. That black person you're talking about is not a governor. That black person on that side of the fence is not a mayor. Do you get the drift?
I got the drift. Yeah.
That's right. See, in other words, that same black person you're talking about doesn't have the power to do anything about his feelings, but that white person who's principal of that school, who's going to expel that black kid for almost nothing. You see where I'm coming from?
Gotcha.
That bank president who's going to deny that black man or that black woman a loan because that person comes in there with his head up, stomach in, chest out, black pride. That's going to make that person say that no. This person's not going to get this loan. When you walk in that courtroom and the judge asks you to testify and you stand there and you're about as articulate as they come. No, we're not going to have some articulate black man or black woman coming in here testifying. You get my drift?
Mm-hmm. Of course, now.
In other words, all of those help to work against black people. Some people may say conspire even against black people. We don't have the power to overturn. How many people in this town right now can just pick up the phone and make change? You can count the black person who can do that.
You give me too much credit. Listen. Let me ask you a question here. I hear what you're saying and I hear where you're going, but there's also something that black folks have a hell of a lot of control over that we do not use enough, and that is where we spend that dollar. We only have to get mad at people when they won't give us what they have. Whatever happened to this thing that most black folks had to do back in the day is stand on your own 2 feet, create your own job. I get tired of people begging somebody for something that they have. We build our own.
I agree with you, and I hope you've heard of Black Wall Street in Tulsa.
I heard of it.
Hope you've heard of Auburn Avenue.
I have.
In Atlanta. I hope you've heard of Monroe Street in Montgomery. You get my drift.
I hear you.
We have had our own.
Right.
And if you grew up in Montgomery during the years of my youth and the generations and decades before that, you went on Monroe Street on a Friday evening or a Saturday, you saw everybody in the world that you had not seen in the last 5 days or so. And the point is, as I say to you, even on Monroe Street, in our case, how many of those businesses were actually owned by African Americans? Some of them were. When I can name many of them were. But the point of the matter is, we still are a powerless people, and the educational system has taught us to feel that we have not made any contributions. When I came back to Alabama in 1982, Reverend G.W.C. Richardson, the pastor of Hutchinson Street Missionary Baptist Church at the time, we were moving around the city. We were invited to talk about blacks in the Bible. Now, how many people would want to hear someone stand before in a church group and talk about blacks in the Bible, if you get my drift?
Right.
Or put the Bible in historical context. And that's what I try to do all the time, to put our experience in historical context. When we have Black History Month, and I hope I'm not going too far afield with your point. When we have Black History Month, if you notice, just about every speaker will come there and talk about an African American that everybody knew. They don't talk about African Americans who helped to lay the foundation in Europe, who helped to lay the foundation for affairs in Asia, who helped to lay the foundation for affairs in South America. You get my drift.
Mm-hmm.
That nobody even asked them to bring to the table. But that real African-American historian can stand there flat-footed and tell those stories of what we did in Europe, what we did in Asia. You get what I'm saying? What we did
Gotcha.
in South America. And what I'm saying is we have been taught not to trust each other. We have been taught that we made no significant contributions to anything worthwhile. And that's why some of us believe that some other people's ice is a bit colder than our ice.
Gotcha. Let me ask you one more question. You were living in Montgomery during the Whitehurst killing, right?
No, I was not.
Okay.
But I knew Bernard Whitehurst, his brother, and I were in the first grade together. I knew his mother, Ida. I can walk up and down O'Connell Street and tell you who lived on O'Connell Street, from Hall Street all the way to Pine Leaf. I do that as a historian.
Okay. Are your books? I assume they are still in print.
Yes.
Okay.
And they're still in the bookstore.
Okay, and give us those titles again, because I think there's going to be a little bit more interest, some additional interest after this conversation.
Okay. The first one, Neither Carpetbaggers Nor Scalawags, Black Office Holders During the Reconstruction of Alabama, 1867 to 1878. The other one, They Too Call Alabama Home, African American Profiles, 1800 to 1999.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Dr. Bailey, I absolutely have enjoyed our conversation. And whenever I get back in the regular studio, love to have you come by and have some more of this conversation. It's always interesting. We could go a couple of hours here. So let's let you rest your voice. Thank you for coming by. Is there an email address for you, or they can go to if they want to talk to you more or invite you to have conversation at their places of worship or business? Is there any way people can reach you?
Well, first of all, I'm on the Speakers Bureau for the Alabama Humanities Foundation.
Okay.
And many people reach me by calling the Alabama State Department of Archives and History here in Montgomery. Okay. But my email address is scholarship111@bellsouth.net. Okay,
scholarship111@bellsouth.net. Dr. Bailey, I thank you for giving a lowly, not very well educated man an opportunity to talk to a scholar.
Well, I thank you for having this program, and I'm really serious about that. You're to be commended for having this program.
Well, you're to be commended for studying all that history about it that I didn't have the patience for. But and again, I'm a carpetbagger, so you know. I see things a little bit different.
And we want people to know there were some good carpetbaggers too.
That's right. I'm one of them.
all of them weren't bad.
Yeah, not all of them, but we have our issues. Dr. Bailey, thank you, sir, for talking to us this morning. And let us know when your speaking dates come up and where, if they're in Montgomery, because we like to be there.
Good enough.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Dr. Richard Bailey, who's one of Alabama's most authoritative historians, if you get a chance to see him in person, please do that. Well, anybody want to talk about anything else before I go? You know, this has been an eye-opening kind of thing for me. However, you see, I did get Dr. Bailey to agree with some of my, he kind of did it quickly, but he agreed with some of my conclusions. Well, anyway, folks, time's up. I got to go and watch the $6 Million Man. Whew. Great conversation. I'm going to put this conversation on my podcast and let you guys listen to it at your leisure. Okay. But it'll be up for a couple of days on the Facebook page if you want to go back to it. Folks, have a great day. And no matter what happens to you on this day, remember this: it always has been, it always will be a great day to be alive. And don't forget the words of today. Truth that is uncomfortable, it's still truth. And if you don't want the answer, don't ask the question. Good morning to you. I gotta go or something. I gotta wait till that special part of the song gets here, though. So, I'll just wait for it now. It'll be in a second. Just wait for it. It's coming. It's coming. Oh, tomorrow. What's on for tomorrow? I gotta ask my producer. I don't know who's on for tomorrow. Okay, but somebody will be. Okay. Somebody will be. I don't know who, but somebody will be. Good morning, Miss Bryars, one of our greatest educators in the state of Alabama. Dr. Bryant, what else is going on? That's it? That's all? Okay. Here it comes. Here it comes. Wait on it. Wait on it. Wait on it. Good morning, Jeffrey Huffstickler, KK, Camilla. What are they doing? We need to furlough over sometime next month. Can't tell you exactly which day. You know what Malcolm said. I'll see you. Have a great day, everybody. Here it goes. Oh, yeah.